The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago. Closed captioning for the professors is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury and wrongful death law firm in Chicago.
A recent study labeled colleges of education as an industry of mediocrity that churn out unprepared teachers. Is that study accurate, and what can be done to better prepare our teachers? That's coming up next on today's edition of The Professors. Joining us to talk about how teachers are being prepared to teach are Stephen Wolk, Professor of Education at Northeastern Illinois University; Josh Anderson, Executive Director for Teach for America; Walter Taylor, NBCT Professional Development Facilitator with the Chicago Teachers Union; and Dr. Nick Panamitros, Attorney and Professor at Kennedy King College. Welcome all.
Thank you.
Okay, so a lot of people actually didn't know about this study. Okay, so this study was called the Teacher Prep Review, and it's a report that's based on 1,100 colleges and universities that prepare elementary and secondary teachers, correct? The study was done, what year was that, was it last year?
Recently, yeah.
Yeah, so recently, and it was not a good look.
Well, it wasn't really, to call it a study is a misnomer. It's not really a study, it's really a report, because that organization collects its information by trying to get its hands on class syllabi. That's all they do. They don't visit the campuses, they don't interview faculty, they don't interview students, they don't go into classrooms to see teachers who graduated from programs.
Oh, that's right. They said it's based on looking at the syllabi, the textbooks, student teaching handbooks, and student teacher evaluation instruments. So how do they?
It's a joke. It's a joke, and the truth is it could never be published in an academic journal as a study, because it could never pass peer review because of the methodology and the process they use. I mean, looking at syllabi for a course, and from that you're going to make a decision about condemning an entire academic program because you're looking at the syllabi? It's ridiculous.
But is there some legitimacy to looking at those? I know I'm not saying just look at them alone to come up with an opinion, but you should take a look at those as well, right? I mean, they're not excluded from evaluating a teacher and education program.
That's true, but how deep does the study or the report, whatever we're going to call it, go? Mm-hmm. I mean, it needs to go really deep. I mean, you have to look at the actual instruction that's being done by the teacher, not just at the syllabi.
Absolutely. Well, that's true.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, you can have a great teacher without a syllabus, right? Mm-hmm. But a syllabus without a teacher is nothing.
Well, what you really have here is you have an organization that's politically driven. It's not an organization about pedagogy and education and curriculum. It's an organization that has a political ideology, and they do this work in order to try to push their political agenda as far as education goes. So,
and what's that political agenda?
Well, it's to further bash teachers, it's to further bash, education programs, it's to privatize schools, it's to push charter schools, it's market-based reform.
And one of the articles I read, it says actually public education is the last institution left in America to be privatized.
And that's why they're so vigorously going after it. Coming from the Chicago Teachers Union, obviously I know that all too well. I mean, this is a problem that is across the country, not just in Chicago. It's just that we had the might to fight back. But certainly that is part of the agenda.
Now, I do want to talk about this a little bit more, but you know me, I'm allergic to describing the water while drowning. So we're going to stay on the topic just a little bit. Josh was like, really? No, we're going to stay on the topic a little bit longer, and then I want us to switch gears. But Josh, what's your take on it?
I don't have a great understanding of why they chose to look at these inputs in evaluating the quality of teacher prep programs. So I don't have a really strong take on the specific methodology here. What's more interesting to me, and I think the bigger question we should be asking, and perhaps it's productive in this way because it's begging this bigger question, is when you look at the evidence of how are our students doing in our teachers' classrooms, I think you come to the conclusion that there's a variety of problems, from how we're selecting teachers to how we're preparing teachers, and then to how we're supporting our teachers once they're in the classroom. and also the sorts of environments and the supports we're surrounding our teachers with over the course of a career. So there are a whole host of problems here, but I think what we could probably all agree on is that our students aren't making nearly enough progress in our teachers' classrooms in a general sense, and so we ought to be taking a hard look at each facet of this to figure out what's working, what's not working in driving student learning.
Well, that's very wonderfully stated, and it's a great soundbite. But the problem for me is when you have documents like this, everyone begins quoting them like they're scripture, and they use them as the rationale for making these broad stroke changes in our education policy and things of that nature. I think also the problem with some of these reports are because they are biased. There's no such thing as anybody producing a report that is non-biased. Everyone has a bias, whether it is overt or covert, right? But the problem also becomes when reports like these kind of help further demonize the role of the teacher or the accountability of the teacher in this whole scenario of why aren't our children performing well academically. But at the same time, it begs to be driven into the larger conversation of the marginalization of the career of the teacher in general.
Well, and you know, look, at teacher education programs are so bad, then why are there many schools around the country actually thriving? I mean, what about all the schools and classrooms where students, even if you just take the most basic test score-wise, which I'm not an advocate of, I mean, there are schools in Chicago that have great test scores.
Right,
there are schools all over that have great test scores, but yet most of those teachers came out of teacher education programs. So obviously something must be succeeding there.
So then why do we bother? Why do we bother paying attention to this then? Why bother?
Well, I don't think we should pay attention to the study, in my opinion. I think we should ignore it because I think it's an inherently flawed document. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the issue. I think Josh raises an important point. I mean, these are serious questions. I teach in teacher education, and there are important problems and important issues in teacher education. I make no bones about that. You know, I'm my own worst critic as far as the programs go and as far as teacher education goes.
Yeah, I will just, oh, sorry.
No.
I was just going to add that I strongly agree with something you said, Steve, in that it's interesting when you look out at our system in Chicago today, there are struggling teachers, there are teachers that are getting by, there are thriving teachers. And I think the really interesting thing to start with is what is going on in those thriving teachers' classrooms? What was their experience before they came into the classroom? What did they look like? What did we know about them before they entered their preparation program? What did their preparation entail? What is the support entailed once they arrived there? Because I think there's a ton to learn
But I
from that.
think we've had those conversations before. I think that's what's becoming so mentally exhausting for me is that we keep having these round-robin conversations because after a while, it doesn't take all day to recognize sunshine. We don't need a group of investigators to go out and say, yep, the sun is shining. Yep, the sun is shining. Did you see the sun is shining? That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, but you know what though? Defining good teaching is not that difficult. It's not that easy, actually.
That's right.
Because there are different opinions about what good teaching is.
Well, there is a lot of dynamics that goes into good teaching.
But also, yes, there are, but the nature of the work, our work is always perpetually changing. You can be a good teacher one year, and I know this from experience, and the next year you might be looked at as not being such a good teacher. And what are those dynamics that have created that situation where you were a stellar teacher one year, but the next you were not? I mean, our work is that difficult.
Well, the Gardner article, Why Teacher Assignments Matter, and this is lifted straight from the article. So it says students learn in spite of their effectiveness, not necessarily because of it. Conversely, teachers who are assigned, now this is what he said, a class of future felons are not likely to get the same rating. That's why it's so important to randomly assign students if fairness in evaluating teachers is a consideration. Is that what you're leaning towards? Like there are some years when I've got a great class and they're on it, and there are other years when the kids aren't on it, so I've got to step back and take things a little slower?
I think that's a part of it. I don't agree with that quote.
Yeah, I don't agree with the whole class of future fellas.
Yeah,
I did email Arthur,
yeah,
by the way. I was like, what do you mean by that?
That was certainly a
I'm
problem.
glad you did.
What I don't get is how you calibrate, and I think you were sort of referring to that, how can you calibrate someone assessing one classroom here, and what is the rubric? What is the methodology for evaluating? Because every class, every subject is going to be a little bit different, and until someone is able to come up with some kind of a formula for that, these just blanket statements that good, not good, where do they come from? And how about accountability for administration over faculty? I think that plays a huge role.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about that.
I was just going
Josh,
to
go
add
ahead.
that I agreed the point that accountability for administration is absolutely essential. I think accountability for teachers is essential too. And I feel like what probably we could agree on is that when you look at teacher effectiveness or the success of the teacher, it's really important to look at multiple pieces of evidence and multiple indicators. So to purely base your assessment of a teacher's efficacy on their student growth results on a standardized test in 1 year is an overly limited way to do it. To look at their to look at their growth, though, is one really important thing to look at in the course of their evaluation.
Growth
So,
and but again, I mean, this all goes back to what people see as the purpose of education, right? And the problem is that all the conversation around teacher education is all around test scores. And the thing is, that's not why most teachers become teachers. It's as if they're being silenced. They don't become teachers because they say, I want to get my kid into a higher test score. I want to improve the stock market in the New York Stock Exchange, right?
Yeah.
Or make us compete in the 21st century global economy. Teachers have a much more personal and important reason for why they want to become teachers in the first place.
The question I'd pose is, I got into teaching because I was a student of John Dewey, his political philosophy, which then led me into his educational philosophy. And I believe that teaching is about teaching critical thinking because it's the way we become free and empowered citizens. And one thing I find pretty exciting today is I think in past times, the way we use standardized tests and the actual tests and the standards themselves were really limited and in some ways stifling to educators. I'm very excited personally about the Common Core because I think at heart they're about critical thinking, going deeper in core subjects, but it's really in essence about critical thinking.
I don't think we want to get onto the Common Core right now because that would be, I have a different take on it than that, But I do think that there are some fundamental questions we can ask about teaching, and that is who should become a teacher? I think that that's an extremely important point because I do think for years teacher education programs and to some degree somewhat now are, they allow too many people into the programs. I mean, if it were up to me, I would eliminate undergraduate teacher education programs, and I would really truly professionalize, the career of being a teacher. I would honestly take like the complete opposite approach than Teach for America, in all honesty, and that is rather than giving people like 5 or 6 weeks of training and then putting them in a classroom. I think they should get an undergraduate degree in a discipline, and a liberal arts degree, and then get a master's degree in education to truly professionalize the field of education.
And that's interesting because that's what Lynch is saying in her article, The Necessary Shifts, Changes in Teacher Education. And they're talking about, and she talked about doing subject-specific recruiting by colleges and universities. So it's not like I just go through the education program to be a secondary teacher. It's like, no, I'm going through the program because I'm there to be a math teacher.
And not only secondary,
right?
But imagine if
it's elementary.
Right. Imagine
across
if,
the board.
Imagine if first, second, third, fourth grade teachers. What if there were people that not every single subject, but what if these kids, for half a day they had one teacher who had a specialized knowledge in a certain area of the discipline, and the other half of the day they had another kind of teacher, that had different specialized knowledge. It's just that. I mean, if we really want to get better teachers, and I would argue we have a lot of great teachers out there, but if we want to get better teachers consistently, then what we need is first we need a system outside of schools of education, in society and politics, that make it an enticing career to go into. We need to increase salaries.
Yes.
Dramatically increase salaries. We'll get a lot more people interested in becoming teachers. If you want the best and brightest in the classrooms, then you need the best and brightest to decide to go in the classrooms in the first place.
And not that we don't have, some of the best and brightest now,
Right,
as you alluded to, as you said, but also part of preparing a teacher is not just having the subject matter knowledge that you need to be a teacher of a subject like science, for example. I'm speaking of myself. But also you have to know how to manage a classroom.
Absolutely.
The pedagogy and the idea of creating a culture and climate that the students feel welcome, that's a huge part of teaching. No matter how much knowledge you have, if you can't actually reach the child,
Right.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap, exactly.
and
And
that's
that's
one of the
any college, I mean, that's any classroom setting
Most
from
definitely.
elementary to college. Go ahead.
Including college, because personality is a huge part of it. How do you assess someone's personality? If they've got a great personality, that's definitely going to entice the students, and it's very important. So how do you assess that?
I think that part of what universities and colleges might want to do is maybe even start front loading some of that in the 4-year process or 5-year process of a person becoming a teacher. What I mean by that is to start some of those methods courses earlier, maybe, within those 4 years. Because I think if a student is introduced to these ideas and this pedagogy and these strategies, they'll begin to have a better, grasp of them once they are about to go into, teaching.
But there are some practical issues that
I
come
agree.
in, that
I
come into
agree.
that. For example, I mean, most people don't even declare a major oftentimes until
This-
they're a junior, right? But I agree, and teacher education teacher ed programs are doing a lot of changing in this country. I mean, for example, and I'm sure clinical experiences are beginning to be much sooner now.
Yes.
I mean, in most teacher ed programs, they were really right before student teaching. And so they didn't have a lot of contact with kids, which is crazy if you wait until the end.
Exactly.
Now, I mean, it's sweeping the country. Teacher education programs are having clinical experiences much earlier. They're
How
getting
long is the clinical experience?
Typically, it's 100 hours and then student teaching. And now, I'll give you an example. In my program, we just doubled it. It's going from 100 to 200, and it's not just being at the back end. It's starting as soon as we can, and there are issues, again, logistical issues. You can't do it the first semester they're there because they have to have background checks. They have to have all these legalities in place, right? But as soon as we can, to get them into the classroom, get them not just observing, but teaching with kids, working with kids, understanding the culture of the school.
So kind of like a residency.
It's a residency, and this goes back, 30 years. I mean, there were studies and reports done in the 80s that said that teacher education programs should take some ideas from medical education.
Well, it's true. I mean, I was surprised. So when I went to library school, I was surprised about the. There is a residency requirement for librarianship, believe it or not. But I think that that residency, it's called a research residency or a library residency. And after you finish your degree, then you are assigned to, an academic university or whatever, and go and you're there as an instructor in the library. But I always say it's that program, those programs, the added value is it helps to professionalize the profession. So you're not just going in it loosely like, oh, I couldn't be a rocket scientist, so now I'm a teacher. So you didn't treat it like this was some type of fallback scenario. Let's talk about Teach for America, though, because their approach is slightly different. Tell us about Teach for America, and then we'll talk about what are some of the controversies. And then let's feed that back into the larger conversation
great.
about having teachers prepared.
Sure. So let me just say a little bit about our work in Chicago first. So today in Chicago, we have 600 what we call core members. These are first and second year certified teachers teaching in traditional public schools and charter public schools in the city of Chicago. On top of that, we have 850 alumni of our program. So that's anyone beyond those initial 2 years in the classroom who are still teaching. So 850 of our alumni are still teaching, so in the classroom in Chicago. And then on top of that, we have 63 alumni in Chicago who taught several years, then got their administrative certificate, and who are now principals in the city of Chicago. So what we do essentially is we go out, let's say we do three things. First, we go out to college campuses around the country, top 400 schools around the country, and we recruit aggressively. We believe that it's really, really important to aggressively court talent to come into the education sector. So we have a staff of 250 who just work on recruitment, and basically what we're trying to do is meet one-on-one with college seniors at top schools around the country to say, instead of going into medical school, instead of going to a consulting firm today, consider starting your career within the education sector. And then we put folks through a very rigorous screening process. So in the past year, we got about 60,000 applicants for about 6,000 spots. So we had about a 10% acceptance rate. And the way we select people is based on sort of an evidence-based competency model. So what we're looking at is student achievement data from our first and second year teachers' classrooms over the course of more than a decade to figure out what is it at the admissions stage that actually predicts success once you're in the classroom. So we learned that your GPA, your academic performance, your academic readiness matters a lot. We also noticed that other things matter a lot, some things you wouldn't expect. How organized you are is really important.
There was a study in order to validate that?
Well, it's important to figure out how much to pay attention to that versus other factors, and we noticed that it matters a lot, and it matters as something we should really take into serious consideration. And then some things that are intuitive, but we pay a lot of attention to, like how perseverant someone is, matters a lot as to how successful and what kind of learner they're going to be once they get into the classroom. So the first thing we do is go out on college campuses, we recruit aggressively and put people through a selection process that's pretty rigorous.
And how long is their preparation?
So then the second thing we do to answer that question is preparation. So our people come into our program and we provide 6 weeks of training over the course of the summer. This is the classic criticism of Teach for America, that the training is very short because it's instead of 4 years or instead of a master's degree in education, you're getting 6 weeks. So you've come through this rigorous training program, you're getting 6 weeks of preparation, and then you become, by virtue of passing your certification exam, so the basic skills, your content exam, et cetera, you become a provisionally certified teacher. And then that fall in September, when you start teaching, you are the teacher of record. You have your own classroom here in the city of Chicago. There's a really important piece about our model that people don't generally pay attention to, and it's something we've worked on a lot, which is we believe very, very strongly that the most important learning happens once you're in the classroom. And so for every 18 teachers we have that are in their first or second year, so that's 600 people here in Chicago, for every 18 of those, we have a full-time staff member on my team who is in their classroom every 2 to 3 weeks, giving them feedback so that they learn and grow and develop.
And who are they, though?
So there are alumni. They've taught several years.
So you have someone who's taught 2 years in a classroom teaching someone who's new how to become a teacher? What makes them qualified to teach someone how to become a teacher? They've only taught 2 years.
Yeah, so with all due respect, Steve, I think the important thing to look at from my vantage point is, again, I'm going to bring you back to the central question in my view, which is how much are the kids learning and how are they progressing?
Oh, wait. Let's stop. Okay.
Well, I'd love to answer.
I don't want to go back to the love of the students. I'm be honest. Can I just be honest? I don't have to put my heart on the sleeve. I am tired of us pimping love of the students as part of the rationale for what we do.
Well,
I'm tired. I am an educator, and it's getting exhausting. And I've seen that whole love of the students. It's getting overplayed.
I just want to talk about. I think love of students is very important. What
I
I'm trying to talk about is,
think it's important too, but I think it ends up being a manipulator module in certain conversations when you guys know that you're losing ground. And then you put it back on, but how well it's all about the students. And if it was really all about the students, then we would see the money and the concentration go in a totally different direction and the conversation go in a different direction.
That's right. We wouldn't have all of these schools being closed
But
either.
I think what Teach for America is that it goes into, oh God, I cannot believe we only have 4 minutes left. I'm so sorry.
Can I just get a key fact on the table though? Because I was going to say, it's really important to note that, when you look, you can talk about as much as you want about how short the duration of the training is, all these different inputs, right? But the key thing to look at is how do the kids do in our teachers' classrooms? And what we have is a lot of evidence that says that they do really well and actually on a relative basis.
So would you do it with a surgeon? I mean, you have a new surgeon going in there and
Sorry,
say,
let me just ask
we have a surgeon here. He's been doing this surgery for he had 6
We only
weeks
got
of
3
training
minutes. I'm so sorry.
He has 6 weeks of training, but don't worry, we're going to take this really new surgeon who has like very little experience, and he's going to teach you.
But that's not the other issue. But that's not the other issue. The other issue is that look at how they place isn't there a contractual agreement that says you have to accept the first teaching job offer?
Yeah, our teachers do, yeah.
And so if the first teaching job offer, where is it going to be? It's probably going to be in a charter school because charter schools need those teachers because there is also a rule that says that the teachers do not have to be certified within the first 5 years of the charter. So it's like driving down the cost, it's driving down the salary, and it's deprofessionalizing the role of the teacher because now you're treating it as a certificate program when actually we're saying it is not.
But hang on a second.
Hold on. Let me just say. There's a key misrepresentation you just made. I think that's not quite fair.
I'm looking forward to it.
Which is, you just suggested that our teachers are not certified. Our teachers are certified.
How long do they stay teachers, though?
And so,
80% of them are out of the classroom within 3 years.
Actually, so here are the facts in Chicago, and they're actually I just want to first of all, I want to go back to the point from a second ago about the fact that. So you can bring up the surgeon analogy, which is a really important question to consider. But just, I would love the response to this question. If our students in our teachers' classrooms here in Chicago, these 600 first and second year teachers, if on average they're leading their students, when you look at NWEA, for example, at the elementary level, which is a standardized growth assessment, so it's not the only indicator we should look at, but it's an important indicator of how students are doing. If students in our teachers' classrooms are generally making between 1.5 and 2 years worth of growth, and that's far, far,
Are you
far
putting this
beyond.
back on, but what's
that's
more important is how the students are performing? Is that what you're falling
How much
back on again?
students learn, grow, and progress in the course of our school system ought to be the purpose of why we're here.
But
And
progression,
so-
as you said, is not just measured by a test.
Sure, but I'm just asking the simple question, which is, if you look at that, if our kids in our teachers' classrooms, and these are just the first and second year teachers, are making between 1.5 and 2 years worth of progress in a general sense, and that's way outpacing what's happening
Josh,
in the district
I
in
really
general.
think that you're scapegoating. I think you're scapegoating the response. And what we're talking about is that I understand the focus on the students and the academic performance, but what we're talking about in this conversation is the context of the profession.
I do think that in a way,
Profession ought to be in service of the
look,
students.
you know what? I think there are people involved in Teach for America, and I think many of them, their heart is in the right place. And a lot of the students, a lot of the people you work with, their heart is in the right place, right? But why aren't there Teach for America students going in affluent schools? Because those schools would never allow TFA students in affluent schools.
That's right.
The parents would never allow them in
The
affluent
purpose of
schools.
TFA
That's
is
right.
to focus on low-income communities. Why?
Our mission is around providing quality teachers and leaders for schools in low-income neighborhoods, because basically it's trying to be part of a broader effort to improve or address the academic achievement gap in this country. And we know that afflicts low-income communities more.
But it doesn't take all day to recognize sunshine. We know that the founder of TFA is married to a person that is very involved in charter schools.
He
And
runs
we-
a charter school.
Well, I was trying to be politically kind. All right. Are we doing? Hopefully, we'll do an after-show discussion because we still need to
Can
continue.
I answer
go ahead.
Steve's question?
Well, I don't
which is-
know unless you're going to turn to the screen and do the closing.
I don't want to do the closing. I was just going to say the retention is actually much higher than people give us credit for. So more than 2/3 of our core members stay in the classroom beyond 2
Yeah,
years.
but you're
And
retaining a group that is now being willing to be underpaid.
so
And to
And
be
that's-
undervalued.
and that's
And
certainly
that
not-
goes, and that does come out in the wash in how they deal with their career as a teacher as opposed to as their job as a teacher. And there's a huge
Absolutely.
difference in when you treat what you do as a job and as a career. The passion is totally different. That's our show for today. The conversation continues online at wycc.org. See you next time on The Professors.